like many entrepreneurs, I grew up in a family of small business owners. In fact, my parents bought a retail store on my 7th birthday. But it wasn't just any store. It was a Hallmark store. Literally everyone I knew growing up cared enough to send the very best. So when I ventured out into the business world helping to build companies, I quickly found that not everybody cared this much. In fact, I was bought out of a business for $35 before being fired. And I watched as disgruntled business partners sent letters from their attorneys to the offices next door to them. And I've experienced the betrayal of embezzlement from somebody I considered a friend. But all this caused me to evaluate the role that trust plays. And it's nothing like you expect it to be. Trust is not a measure of how many customers a business has. There are plenty of companies with thousands of customers that don't even want to do business with them. But there are a few companies that are truly loved. And we can represent the value of trust we see in a very simple equation. First, we learn to trust personally through our own interactions and experiences, whether it's with a person or a product. Then we add to or subtract the value we see in a brand. Now, these two are actually quite different. For example, I may not have experienced foodborne illness from a restaurant, but knowing that others have affects my view of trust in that restaurant's brand. Personal and brand trust are then multiplied by innovation, where we gauge how the products themselves build trust, typically by their uniqueness, which we call innovation. But in order to create personal trust, businesses typically hire experts. Now, they call these experts salespeople. Now, the unfortunate reality is that these assassins of trust often miss their mark because we're looking for trust more than we are expertise. Now, you've probably experienced this. I was recently in another country in which I only spoke a few words of the language. And what do you do when you're lost? You look for someone that looks like you do, hopefully dresses like you do, and hopefully speaks English. But in this case, I was approached by a couple as they walked left and right down cobblestone streets, and as they approached me, they were seeking a pub for dinner. Now, I'd been in Copenhagen for a total of 2 hours, so immediately I became their personal concierge. And I shared with them the full extent of my knowledge. Well, I actually passed a pub a couple blocks back. And I'm confident that they went there. Because, you see, people are pursuing trust more than they are a local with expertise. But that's often how we start business relationships, looking for familiarity in order to gain knowledge. But the way we build trust personally is the same whether it's with a person or a product. And psychologists tell us that we walk through this progression where we look at the attraction of the romance stage and the struggle in a power struggle stage. And then we reach this stage of stability where we gauge whether or not a product would be reliable. And finally, we reach a stage of commitment where we're willing to invest significantly in that product. But beyond this stage lies a stage where very few of us venture, a stage called co-creation. Now, co-creation happens when we as customers take an active role in the building of a product. And I can think of no better example right now than what some are referring to as the IKEA effect. And for those of you unfamiliar, there's a relatively large Swedish furniture store, of which the closest to us is about 3 hours that direction. And this unusually large store creates cheap furniture that you need to assemble yourself. That's correct. You, upon making your purchase, become an amateur furniture builder, using rudimentary tools and stick figure directions. But something happens in this process. As you're creating this piece, you become more attached to it. And eventually, you look down at this relatively poorly constructed piece of furniture, and you tell others, I built that. Now, something amazing happens there, because we don't trust people that try to sell to us, but we do trust people that want to create with us. You see, brands create trust differently than people do. A brand at its very core is a story. And every story contains certain elements, like character, setting, rising action, their conclusion. And you remember the story arc from school, right? But most brands do a great job of telling the beginning of their story, or they tell you about their characters. And they, in general, tell you a pretty good idea of how the end of the story works, where they tell you about how that product would do things for you. But you see, most brands do a horrible job of telling the middle part of their story. And I believe that that's why we don't trust them. You see, most brands aren't willing to be vulnerable with us and tell us about conflict. And that's where we live in the bulk of a story. You see, most marketers, above all, don't want to talk about conflict. But I recently visited a restaurant in Pittsburgh that does just that. At the Conflict Kitchen, they serve conflict, and it's elevated them to a top Yelp-reviewed restaurant. You see, they only serve food from countries the U.S. is in conflict with. But they don't stop there. You see, they also invite people with connections to those countries to share their stories with patrons. You see, it's the conflict that has brought them emotion, substance, and even customers. But most brands run from these examples in their story. But in 2002, when Mini Cooper decided to bring their cars to the United States, people said just one thing about their brand. They said, those cars will never sell here. They're far too small. But rather than run from the action in their story and dodge this disadvantage, Mini Cooper ran an ad campaign saying, it's not small, it's mini. See, they broadcast to the market that it was smaller than small. And they doubled down, engaging in their whole story, and they literally ran billboards with Mini Coopers on the top of Suburbans to emphasize their point. You see, we crave this kind of authenticity in brands. So it should come as no surprise to us when a trusted brand of 100 years gets beat up by a startup that's willing to be vulnerable with their story. Now, it could be the world's leader in sports or America's most trusted car, but bragging about historical success is not how we build trust in a brand. But rather, as we look to the future, we look at how brands and products themselves create trust. See, today, we can connect with a product before it's ever been built. If an innovator decides to use crowdfunding, they can upload a video, submit a description, and get us to go as far as to even invest in that product before it's been built. But innovation is far more than just this kind of explanation. You see, I grew up going to the hardware store with my father, and when we would go to the store, he would take great care to look for a product that he said was built to last. And I grew up thinking that a product at its very core function should be to earn this kind of a reputation of being built to last. That is, that it always performs like it did the day it was created. But being built to last isn't what builds trust in products today. We don't buy products for what they always have been. We buy innovations for what they will be. And we wait in line for the latest Apple iPhone because of what it will be. And we trust companies like Apple because we know that within a month they'll release an update making that product better than on the day it launched. And technology companies have conditioned us with pay-as-you-go models, these monthly fees in direct relationship to their updates. And every time one of us signs up for one of these subscriptions, we're asking a technology company to promise to continue to innovate. And when I ask my Amazon Alexa whether I'm asking her for the weather or I'm asking her to turn on the lights, if she wants to gain more trust, she can do that by learning a new skill. You see, technology companies and most companies stop and ask, when will this product be done? But truly innovative companies never stop asking their customers for feedback, knowing that they could be better tomorrow. Because innovative companies realize that if they stop, this promise of innovation is broken. And innovative companies realize that they depend on a social proof. That proof being that we don't buy products for products themselves. You see, we buy into a community of customers that invest in that product. And this community of customers are the same community that builds recipes for my patio grill. They assemble playlists for me on Spotify. And they even tell me which Airbnb I should stay at. You see, trust has always been the hardest and most important thing in business. And we don't need companies creating the latest sales gimmick. We need companies being vulnerable with their story, willing to pursue constant innovation. It's time we built more companies that are loved, ones that embrace a currency of trust.